Hello and welcome to Relatable Code. In this video, we will talk about loops in Kotlin. So let's get started. I've been pretty consistent with my uploads. I've been uploading every Thursday and every Sunday, but you might watch this video on a Friday, okay? Because I actually got bit yesterday by my dog, and that's what he did. So I had to get rushed to get a vaccine, okay? The sad thing is, it's a golden retriever. He's supposed to be very friendly, which he's not. Okay, more on that later. In this video, we will talk about loops in Kotlin. So what's a loop? A loop is like a statement or a piece of code that gets executed repeatedly based on a given condition. And I'll give you an example. Suppose a customer walks into our library and he wants to maybe have a seat in our seating room. Okay. We have 4 seats currently, and here you can see that they are all empty. Okay. So the customer walks up to us and he tells us that he wants to have a certain seat in our reading room. We tell him, okay, let's check the available seats so that you can choose one. Okay. And how we can do that is like this. We have to loop over all of the seats in our list so that we can get the state of every single one. And I'll show you how. So you write for, this is a for loop, okay? For index in reading seats dot indices. And the reason I'm using index is so that I can get the number of every seat in my room, okay? So let's say print line seat at index is, and I want to get the state of that seat. And how I can do that? I will have to access my list at the given index. And I can do it like this. So, $, brackets, reading seats dot get, at which index? At this index. Okay, we have a suggestion. I think there's a certain way to do this in Kotlin, and that's using these brackets. Okay, so this is equivalent to reading seats.get index. Let's try to run our code to see how it works. Run main Kotlin function. Let's check. Okay, so here you can see seat at 0 is occupied. And the reason for that, I think we changed one of the states when we were explaining them. Yes, here you can see we accessed the reading seat at index 0 and we changed its value to occupied in the previous video. Okay, which is why when we looped over the list in this case and we tried to print out every item at every index in this list, we got this output. Okay, so seat at, we begin at 0 because we agreed that the indices inside a list begin at 0, okay, at index 0. So seat at the first index will be 0 is, and that value will get printed out through this code, okay, reading seats at this index. So that's for seat at 0. Seat at 1 is the same case. Okay, we have 4 seats, so we're going to find 4 print line statements because this is a for loop. So you are iterating over every item in your list. And what we're doing here with every item, we're just printing the value of that item along with the index. Okay, so seat at index 1 is empty. The reason for that, this is the seat at index 1. Okay, this is a very handy way to use for loops in Kotlin, and it's one of the many ways. Okay, let's dive into another. So, if you recall, I told you that loops are like statements or blocks of code that get executed repeatedly based on a given condition. But how did that apply to this case? Well, that was the block of code that got executed repeatedly. And what was the condition? This was the condition, okay? The number of indices in our list. So in our case, we had 4. So our code, this line of code got executed 4 times, okay? So the condition in our case was just the number of items in our list. Okay, that was one way to perform a loop in Kotlin. And now I'll show you another way where you don't really care about the index of the item in the list. So you can do something like, if you recall mutable stack of books, you can write mutable stack of books dot for each. That's another way to write a loop in Kotlin. And here we can do print line, and here pay attention. For each is not like the for loop that we just used. For each is like a function in this case, and it's called an extension function. Okay, we will make a separate video about extension functions, but what you need to know is that extension functions get called on certain receivers or certain variables, if you want, in this case. Okay, so our variable was mutable stack of books. It was of type mutable list of strings. So lists and mutable lists in Kotlin can be iterated over with the help of this for each function. So you write mutable stack of books dot for each, and here you get the item in the list. And you can write it like this. You can write print line, and here you can see a hint telling you that each item is represented by the it keyword. Okay, or not a keyword, just a certain expression or variable in this case. So you can write print line it. Okay, let's run our function, our main.kt function. And here in our output, we can see in the last 2 outputs, we have the mutable stack of books, okay, which was, why did I omit the Great Gatsby? Okay, first I changed its name, then I removed it, okay. So I still have to kill a mockingbird, and I still have a new book for some reason. We added a new book and we called it new book in the previous video. Okay, that was how you loop over a list in Kotlin without caring about the index of each item in that list. It's very fast, it's very handy, and we're going to use it a lot in the future. Okay, so that was the for each loop in Kotlin. Okay, now I'm going to show you the while loop. So suppose we have this mutable stack of books, which we want to empty. Okay, maybe we want to empty it to replace the stack with another stack of books later. So we can do that like while, and here we enter our condition. Okay, in the for each loop, the condition was also the number of items in this list, because for every item in this list, this block of code was getting executed. In our case, we want to remove every single item in the mutable stack of books. So we just want to execute some code if this stack of books still has some items in it. And we can do that like this. So our condition will be while mutable stack of books, we can write dot, and we can use a very handy function in Kotlin called is not empty. Okay, so as long as this list is not empty, we are free to remove an item in this list. Okay, and we can do it like that. Mutable stack of books dot remove at, and here we want to remove the last item every time. Okay, and I'll tell you why. So we write mutable stack of books dot size -1, and I'll also tell you why we use -1. And here we write print line removed book. I think that's good. And we can write remaining, for example, $, mutable stack of books dot size. Let's try to add a few items to our mutable stack of books. So we use Ctrl D to duplicate. Don't forget to add commas at the end of every string in the list so that you can separate them, and the list knows that this is an entry and this is the entry after that, and so on. Okay. Let's try to run this function. Okay, and as you can see, okay, so these are our 5 books, I believe, because of the for each block. Okay, so we had 5 books in this list, and we wanted to remove all of them. So what we did, we wrote while mutable stack of books is still not empty. As long as it's not empty, I want to execute this block of code and remove an item from that list. And usually, the safe way to remove items from the list, in this case, is always to remove the last item. Okay? Because here you can see we had 5 statements because we had 5 books in this list. Okay? And you know that in lists, the index always starts at 0, right? So the last book in our list, which is the 5th book, would be at index 4. Okay? Which is why we did this. We wrote mutable stack of books dot remove at mutable stack of books dot size, which is 5, -1, which is 4, to remove the last item in this list. Okay? So now we have around 4 items remaining in the list after we removed the last one. So now the size is equal to 4, and I want to remove this item in the list, the last one. We always remove the last item in the list and not the first one. Okay? So now we have a size of 4, and we want to remove the item at index 3. So we also need mutable stack of books dot size, which is now 4, -1, so that we remove the element at index 3. Okay, which is the 4th item in our list. And that carries on until we have just one item in our list. When we have one item in our list, the size is now 1, and we want to remove the item at index 0. So we write mutable stack of books dot size, which is now equal to 1, -1, so that we can get the item at index 0 and remove it. Okay, that was why we used mutable stack of books dot size -1. Okay, and after removing it, we just printed out how many books were remaining. Okay, so after removing the first item, 4 books were remaining because we have a total of 5 books. Okay, I hope that was clear. That was a nice use case for the while loop. And now I'll show you another. And I think I forgot to mention why we always remove the last item in a list. Okay, so here we have 5 books, right? Suppose we remove the first book every time when we loop over these books in this block. What would happen is after removing the first book, the second item will now become the first item. The third item will now become the second item. The fourth item will now become the third item, and so on. So as you can see, there's a time complexity, as they say, when performing an operation like this, which you don't face if you remove the last item in a list. Because let's say this is the last item in our list. After removing it, this will still be the first item. This will still be the second item, and so on. Okay? So no reordering is required when you remove the last item in the list every time, which is why most programmers, at least that I know of, when performing an operation like this, remove the last item in the list. Okay, to avoid problems like reordering the list every time after removing an item. Okay, now let's move on to the do-while loop. Okay, so the difference between a while loop and a do-while loop is pretty simple. The while loop checks for the condition before going into the code for the first time. Meanwhile, the do-while loop executes the code before checking for the condition. And I'll provide you with a valid use case for that. So let's say we want to prompt, for example, our user to enter a username and password into the system. So we can do that with the help of a do-while loop. So what we would need actually to record the result of the operation performed by the user, which is entering the username and the password. We want to validate them to see if the user has a valid login. Okay? So we're going to need a result to keep track of the operation, whether it was successful or not. So we write var result equals empty string. And now we have to perform a do while. Okay, and I'll show you why we choose the do while in this case. So we write do, and here we want to prompt the user to enter a username. Okay, so print line, please enter a username, val username equals read line. Okay, and after that we have to prompt the user to enter a password. So print line, please enter a password, and similarly val password equals read line. And what do we want to do when we have the username and password? We want to check if they are equal to certain values so that we can determine whether the result was success or failure. Okay? Uh, so let's say if username is equal to, for example, admin, and at the same time I want my password to be equal to 1234. And here, in this case, when both conditions are met, we write result equals success. Else, result equals failure. And after the do loop, we have to write a while loop. So that's a do while loop. So I want to just keep executing this block of code until the result is success. So I want to execute this code while the result is not successful or failure in this case. Okay, so I write while result equals, and we copy paste that failure string here. Okay, So in this block of code, I'm assigning a result to be initially empty before I execute this code, and I'm performing a loop. So I'm telling the user, please enter a username. I'm reading that username. I'm prompting the user for a password. I'm reading the password from the input window. And I'm checking if the user entered a username equal to admin and a password equals to 1234. I would write result equals success. I would change the value of result, in this case, to success. Okay, and if this is met, and there's no more code to be executed, we check the while loop, or the while statement in this case. So the while statement is result equal failure. When it is equal to success, this will not get executed, and as a result, this loop will finish. Okay, but if the result is failure from the do block of code, this code gets triggered here, and the loop is restarted. Okay, let's try to run it so you can see the example. So run our function again. You can run from here. So please enter a username. Please let it work. Admin. Please enter a password 1234. Okay, process finished. It's better to print out a statement to the user so that he can know that the result was successful. Okay, so print line successful login. Else, you can select all of that and go shift left curly brace, and now it's in between two curly braces. Okay, so print line failed to login. Let's run our code again and enter a username and a password 1234. Successful login. But if we enter a username that's not admin, like for example Tair, and a password like 123, I get failed to login, and I also get another prompt to enter a username. Why? Because after this code was reached, the while statement was evaluated, the result was indeed failure. So the loop was restarted and I went back to this. Okay? And that was the do while loop. So as you can see, the difference between the while loop and the do while loop is with the while loop, you check for the condition before going into the block of code, always. Okay? Meanwhile, in a do-while loop, this code gets executed at least once, okay? Because the do block of code is executed before the while statement is evaluated, okay? Which was in this case valid because we wanted the user to enter a username and a password at least once so that we can record it. Okay, you can't use this while loop with this feature if you want, or use case, because with the while loop, the condition is always checked first before going into the code. Okay, and now I want to show you the final loop for this video, and it's another variation of the for loop. Okay, but instead of iterating over a list with indices, we want to execute some block of code for a certain number of times, and I'll give you a valid use case for that. So in our previous example, we prompted the user to enter a username and a password, and we just kept on checking if the result is success or failure every time. Okay? When implementing a login mechanism, You don't want that. You don't want the user to have an infinite number of tries. You want to limit the number of tries that the user can execute at least before trying to block his account, for example. And you can do that using this second variation of the for loop, because in this variation, you will be iterating over some piece of code for a certain number of times. Okay, so we're going to do that like this. We write for, and we want to keep track of the attempt of the user. Okay, we're going to give him 3 attempts to try to enter a valid username and password. So we write attempt. You can name that whatever you want, it doesn't matter. And 1 till 3 in this range, which means the user has 3 attempts, 1, 2, and 3. Okay, so this piece of code will get executed 3 times as a maximum. Okay, so here to take advantage of the attempt variable, we write print line attempt, for example, number $sign attempt. Okay, let's copy and paste this code like this. We want the user to enter a username and a password. But now, if the user enters a valid username and password, we write print successful login and we try to break the loop. And I'll show you how to do that. So just copy paste this whole if else statement. We don't need the result variable here. So we print out successful login and we break the loop so that it doesn't get executed again. Okay, because the user successfully logged in, we just want to exit the loop like we did here. After executing this do block, one is this not repeated if the result is not failure. So if the result is success, okay? And that was handled in the while loop. Here we don't have a while loop, so you have to handle that manually. And you do that by writing break, which exits the for loop, okay? Else print failed to login. Let's comment out this piece of code. And here we just check if attempt. For example, we want to check if it's the third attempt, and we do that and not outside the if else block, in the else block. Okay, so in the else block, we write if attempt is equal to 3, which would suggest our third attempt. Print line, for example, no more attempts available. Let's try to run our code. We can run it from here. Please enter a username, admin, password 1234, successful login, and it's finished. Okay. Let's try to trigger the other case. Rerun our function. Enter a username, admin, password 123. Failed to login. Now we have attempt number 2. So username admin, password 12345. Failed to login. Now we are at attempt number 3. So username admin, password 12. Failed to login. No more attempts available, which is great because you don't want the user to just log in or try to log in as much as he wants on your system, which is pretty bad behavior. Okay, and here, why is this? Okay, you're expecting another curly brace. How did you get executed like that? You will see a lot of similar issues when you're coding. It demanded an extra curly brace, and when I added it, it didn't want it anymore. It happens, it happens. Okay, so let's review this for loop. For attempt n 1 till 3, we first write the attempt number like this. After that, we just prompt the user for a username, a password, and we do a check for that username and password. If they are compatible with these conditions, we just print line successful login and we exit the loop. Okay, there's no more need to repeat this loop because the user successfully guessed the username and the password required. So we write break to exit this for loop. Else, if the user didn't guess this combination, we write fail to login for the user. And if the user has reached attempt number 3, which happened in our case, we don't want the user to proceed anymore. And we write print line, no more attempts available, so that he can know that he exhausted his 3 attempts. Okay? And as I told you, you can name this whatever you want. We made use of this here when printing the attempt number, and here as well when we wanted to check if attempt was equal to 3. And you noticed that I moved the statement from outside the if-else block to inside the if-else block. And that's because I just want to check for this in case the user failed to log in. Okay? If you write the statement outside the if-else block, it will get executed regardless if the user had a successful login or the user failed to login. Okay? Because this code gets executed and then this code gets executed in sequential order. Okay? Meanwhile, if you remove this piece of code from here and you write it in the else statement, in this way this code will only get executed in the context of the else statement if the user didn't enter the correct combination of username and password. Okay? Now, that was a lot of material we covered in this video. Okay, feel free to go over these loops again and play around with them. Really check how each one of them works. And I hope you found these examples to be valid. I didn't want to give you the typical simple examples that you see when you try to study loops in Kotlin or any other programming language. I try to give you something that's relatable and something that you can remember in the future when you want to choose between these loops to write in your code. Okay, I hope that was clear. And that's it. If you find my content relatable and you like this video, please don't forget to leave a like and subscribe for future content. And I'll see you in the next video.